It has been a challenge, right? There's no secret there. The city of Chicago is different. And I've said this from the very beginning. The city government that we inherited will not be the city government that we pass on to the next generation. And I'm good with that, right? This is not our forefathers, foremothers government anymore, right? It's a far more inclusive, engaged government, which is something that the people of Chicago wanted.
Hi, everybody. I'm Fran Spielman. My guest this week is Mayor Brandon Johnson, who is about to celebrate his midterm anniversary. Congratulations and welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
Joining us in questioning the mayor is Mariah Woelfel, the fabulous City Hall reporter for WBEZ, our news partners. Mayor Johnson, on a personal level, how have you changed in these 2 years, and how does it feel to be approaching that anniversary?
Well, first, it has been the joy of my life serving in this capacity. The city of Chicago is just an amazing space. The diversity, the beauty of our city is just absolutely remarkable. And having the opportunity to serve in this capacity, as well as see the city through the lens of being mayor, has just been it's remarkably gorgeous and humbling. I think for me, the part that has transformed in me is that the level of expectation and hope and inspiration that people anticipate or desire from government, I have seen firsthand the possibility and the likelihood of that type of transformation, something that I did not get a chance to see as an organizer, as an educator, because for so much of my life, we've been told of what government cannot do. And what has changed in me is given me reassurance of how government can show up on behalf of working people, and our ability to deliver for working people is something that is not a far gone conclusion. It can be a reality if we, collectively work together and struggle to ensure that it becomes real for people.
I know one way you've changed. You look like you lost a ton of weight.
Well, honestly, one of the things that I can tell you, especially when I first got elected, the number of individuals who were around during Mayor Harold Washington's time talked about just taking care of yourself, eating right, and exercising. So I've been doing that. I've been, I find a lot of solace in the morning when I'm riding my bike up towards Garfield Park and back through the Austin neighborhood, and just being more conscientious of the things that I digest.
How much have you lost, and how have you done it? Have you done it the old-fashioned way by
Yeah, it's an old-fashioned way, just
exercise and eating, or is it
exercising.
Wegovy and Ozempic?
No, the old-fashioned way, right? Just eating right and exercising, and spending more time in prayer and just being a little bit more disciplined. I've heard of powerful politicians who had very strong regimented diets, and so I'm trying to model myself in a way that um, prepares me for the day, but also allows me to be healthy and strong as I deal with all of these looming challenges that the city of Chicago is embracing and working to transform.
How much have you lost?
I don't know. I don't weigh myself. I will
But
say
you've
this.
changed a couple suit sizes, probably, right?
Perhaps, I will say it like this though. I believe it's important to be healthy and fit. And this job does take an awful lot out of you, but it also pours so much into you. And so I want to make sure that I'm strong and focused so that I can show up for the people of Chicago. But I think that's a compliment, I believe, what you're trying to offer me, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
I was
okay.
going to say you look very good.
See, that's the part I was
It
waiting
is
on
a
for.
compliment.
All right.
It is. In one of your most candid reflections about your own job performance, you told an audience at a Black church recently that your biggest mistake was in not cleaning house fast enough, and you said, if you ain't with us, you gotta go. What did you mean by that?
Well, look, I think it's important that we find ways in which we can work with people, even those who may have differing opinions or perspectives. In my attempt to bring people together, which I believe is my responsibility as mayor, to bring a coalition together that mimics the coalition that elected me, that there are some individuals who were just not really interested in carrying out our vision. They just could not make the leap for a variety of reasons. I don't know if it was always personal or ideological, but I think it's clear though that as we have moved forward, we're seeing the results of the type of transformation that this city really deserves. And I want to honor that with people who understand the importance and the relevance of this unique moment that we have in our cities, in our nation's history.
So you gave them a chance and they didn't measure up to that kind of standard.
Well, giving them a chance to, prove that we can work with individuals who may not have had, again, the same motivation as I. And what I gathered from those conversations and experiences is that to the best of my ability, I had to give people an opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to public service while also making sure that they had the same level of urgency and conviction that I pronounce every single day. And I think, maybe it's the fact that, I was raised in a, fundamentalist Christian home where you work hard to understand other people's perspectives and learn to work with people and not to be judgmental. And that is the still core tenets of my faith and my belief. But I found it, um, quite frankly, incorrigible as it became harder and harder to move forward with people who just did not share my values.
That surely can't be your only mistake. As you look back, what else might you have done differently or changed? Everyone has regrets.
Sure, of course. I look. I'm human. I make mistakes, um, and I work to learn from those mistakes. And one of the things that I try to share on a more regular basis is that everything doesn't have to be perfect in order for it to work. And I've certainly learned that in 26 years of marriage. But one of the things that I do regret, and it was an error on my part, I did not effectively communicate with the people of Chicago what and why we were doing it. And I recognize that because it reminds me of a conversation I had with Reverend Jackson. And he said, and this was when I was an organizer and I was out there like really pushing our agenda to transform the city and our education system. And he said, Brandon, as an organizer, you're going to have to learn to tell them, people, what you're doing. And you have to tell it as if it's the first time they've ever heard it. And, it's keep hope alive, right? Reverend Jackson, keep hope alive, right? And I underestimated the amount of energy and effort that would have been necessary to help the people of Chicago know exactly why and what. And that's something that I'm going to course correct, where we're doing more regular, consistent stand-ups with the press. We're, visiting senior homes, visiting high schools. We're having these lakeside chats. We're doing days in the ward. I just spent, a good portion of my day on Friday in the second ward with Alderman Brian Hopkins, and we're going to do more of those type of interactions. But I will just end it with this. The amount of work that it takes to transform this city is the same amount of work that I have to do to communicate what and why we are transforming this city.
Can
Right.
you, Mayor, can you think of 2 or 3 specific decisions that you've made that if you had the chance, you would go back and redo?
Wow. Look, there is a person right now that is leading a multi-million dollar pack against our work, right? And the person who is helping to lead that was the senior advisor to my CEO of Chicago Public Schools. And I wanted to work with the CEO, Martinez. He didn't. And I think in retrospect, um, I should have known that his value system was not aligned with where we were going. And That's a decision that in retrospect, I should have been more forthright about the reality that this individual just was not capable
Should
of
you have
carrying
come
out.
in with your own CEO or
Well,
gotten rid of him
and
sooner?
so I'm glad you asked it more directly. This again is going back to just the core tenets of my faith of, you know, working with people or giving people the benefit of the doubt and not to come across dictatorial, right? Because, I didn't want, quite frankly, the people to characterize me in a way that doesn't match my true nature. And, to the best of my ability, I have to still follow my gut and my instincts. And my instincts at the time, um, my instincts provocated me in a way that I suppressed. And that's one decision that I've had to live with. I've
It
learned
was
from
a
it.
pretty big mistake because you've had this
Look,
ugly mess here that
well,
still
look,
goes on.
I've learned from it, right? And that that's the nature of just you know humanity is that you learn from those errors, and I won't do that again.
And so you would have come in with a CEO or
I think
just
what
fired him sooner?
I would have done would have had a stronger, better assessment and analysis of um, the lack of clarity and appreciation for how I became mayor. That I would have had um, a process that would have pushed us to identify someone who could appreciate that more, right? And I was a public school teacher. I was an organizer. The elevators that are held for me were elevators that I stood in front of and blocked and took an arrest. I just don't think that he just could not conceptualize like the power that we displayed in a middle school teacher, someone from a working class family with no political ties to any of the machine form of politics to become mayor of Chicago. And there was a disregard and a dismissiveness that I believe that he had and shared, and it just made it harder for him to embrace what the people of Chicago had already embraced.
And what made Martinez different from someone like Dr. Allison Arwady? You weren't shy about cleaning house in certain departments. So I'm just curious,
Well, remember, she left on her own. I did not.
That's not what she said, though.
What she did announce her resignation. Um, I did not offer up, a letter to her asking her to step down. She did that on her own, and respected her decision. I didn't take umbrage with her desire to move on with her life. I just know that was one area in particular. And then again, as I said before, as an organizer, as someone who has communicated with voters, I really thought, this is if I could do this over again. I brought people together internally as we begin to build my administration, right? And standing up my administration to respond to all of the critical issues that our city was facing. It was also my responsibility while I was internally standing up in administration was to make sure that we were effectively building the apparatus outside of my administration that could carry that agenda. And I would just say it like this, spending time in Bible study and just our lesson last week, where after Jesus had performed a couple of miracles, feeding the 5,000 and the 4,000, the disciples still had questions about, you know, who he was and what the ultimate ministry would entail. And one of the things that I just took from that passage is that even when you're doing good work, I took it for granted that people would just find out that I was doing good work, right? If it was happening, as long as it was happening, that people would know.
By osmosis.
Or just through, some of the traditional forms where you have a press conference or a press release versus the deep um, um, organizing that it took for me to become mayor, maintaining that apparatus while also building my administration was something that I do regret and recognize that if I could have done it differently, we would have done days in the wards, lakeside chats, visiting senior homes. We would have done that from the jump. And we're course correcting though, right? And that's something
Is
that
it too late?
no, it's never too late, right? I mean, because even if I just stick with the passage, Mark chapter 8, and Jesus warned the disciples, be weary, not weary, but be aware of the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. These were individuals that constantly tested Jesus and really doubted Jesus. And that if you don't get out in front and make sure that your message is clear, your opposition certainly will. And that's exactly what happened, right? So the
They
opposition,
defined you.
they ended up defining us, despite the fact that we were building affordable homes. We were increasing the number of youth employment. We're opening up mental health clinics, right? Violence is down in the city of Chicago, but yet I took it. I regret that I was not in that portion of Bible study 2 years ago, that if you allow their message as yeast to spread and rise, your opposition will do everything in their power to not just undermine, but to get other people to question who you really are.
You recently told the tribe that the Elon Musks of Chicago want the seat back, and even if their name is not attached to it, they're going to put somebody up who will do their bidding. You also said it isn't enough to win the power. You have to protect the power, and the first thing you did was make sure you had key Black people in positions of power, and that was why it was important to get a vice mayor who is Black and Walter Burnett. You said your wife hates it when you speak this way, but if anything were to happen to me, God forbid I have placed our people in key positions. What did you mean by if anything were to happen to me?
Let me just say, first of all, it was important for me to have an administration that better reflects the city of Chicago. We do have
That we know,
one of the
but
most
what did you
diverse.
mean by
I got
that
you, but I
statement?
also want to just make sure that I lift up what I meant about the entire statement. Having the makeup of my administration reflect not just the values of the city, but the complexion of the city is important, right? And so between Black, brown, white, Asians, we have the most diverse administration in the history of Chicago. I'm very proud of that. In terms of making sure that there are key people in position to not only carry out the vision of my administration, but also understand the importance of diversity in my administration. Look, life is precious and delicate, and I don't take it for granted that the air that I breathe is somehow automatically owed to me. And what I meant is that if somehow my life um, has an expiration date that's before the one that I'm anticipating, that we have people in position of power to be able to carry out our mission. This is not just about Brandon.
But
This
did
is
you
about the
mean that
wholeness.
someone would do something to you or that you would be?
No, no, no. I mean, I hope it's not that
It
cynical,
was
right?
unclear, yeah,
Well, it's not that I feel like my life is under
targeted or.
threat, right? Not in that regard, right? But what I can say though is that every single moment in life is precious, and I believe that it's important as a leader we always set a standard as well as a trajectory that allows for movement to outlive us, right? And that's that's important to me, right? Um, these are um, ideas as well as perspectives that I have and I hold because we have seen in Chicago how movements can be disrupted by simply eliminating a person or two.
Yeah,
And
Harold
whether
Washington.
it's a good example, but it's happened to people politically as well, and not just on a personal note in a violent way, but it can happen in many different forms. And I want to make sure that our work outlives us.
Back to CPS, one of the biggest stumbles was what happened with the school board. You alluded to it. Your appointed board resigned en masse. A replacement board president, resigned amid anti Semitic and other troubling sexist social media posts. Can you just talk about how that happened, especially when schools are your area of expertise? Did you expect that to be such a problem area for you?
Did I expect that the CEO would threaten to sue board members if they stood up for working people? No, I did not expect that.
Well, the
Who
board
comes
on
in?
resigning en masse.
Yeah, but because they were threatened. No one expected that. They were threatened. And I mean, you're seeing how
Is that why they quit?
they yes, They were threatened. And
By him.
you see what he's doing now. That right now you have a CEO that is spending more time litigating and, trying to assert his authority in the way in which those who ruined this city used to do, instead of coming up with a clear vision around how we respond to our budget. Now, look, the reality is this, that if you just see who the people who are lining up millions of dollars to block our vision for the city of Chicago, these are the same individuals who supported redlining, the closing of schools, the privatization of our public school system, again, the dismantling of public housing. These are the same individuals who do not see the value in veteran Black and brown educators, right? These are the people who have harmed the finances in this city. And these are the people, of course, that are providing counsel to anyone who would be willing to be in opposition to our vision for Chicago. There's no secret there. And, here's what I've learned, though, because it was an area that I've already mentioned that I regret, that me being elected was a bigger threat to the interest of large corporations and the wealthy than I thought about every day, right? I didn't go into my job thinking every single day that there are people who are out to destroy me. You get up and you show up because there are people who are counting on me, right? So I think more about the people who are counting on me than those who are working to destroy me. And again, going back to just my reflection, riding my bike in the morning, spending time in prayer, I really wish that we would have been studying Mark chapter 8 2 years ago, because I would have been a little bit clearer around how, if we're not being intentional about those who want to spread division, those who are committed to deception, those who are committed to undermining and destroying all of the good work and the goodwill that we had coming in, that I would have been far more intentional about removing those individuals from the space. Now, here's what we've been able to do despite all of that. It's a teacher's contract that reflects the vision that I have for Chicago. So it's not like even with that error, we weren't able to accomplish our said goal, right? I mean, we settled this contract. We have smaller class sizes. That's a benefit for our kindergartners. We're protecting Black history. We're protecting LGBTQ plus rights, right? We're ensuring that, families have access to this model that I believe is transformative, which is the sustainable community schools model. So even with all of that opposition, and even with, me regrettably not challenging our administration at that time to ensure that we have powerful leadership that is aligned with us, it did not prevent us from having one of the most substantial investments in our public education system that we've seen in a generation.
But you don't have the money to pay for it after this year. How are you going to pay for it?
Well, that's the failure of the CEO. It is.
Doesn't
right?
matter. It's on your plate now.
It's always been on my plate. What I'm saying is,
How are you going to pay
I
for
got
it?
you, Fran. It's the failure of the CEO. I have to name that, though, right? Of course, I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. I've already done it. I don't have to prove that anymore, right? But the reason why I'm saying it's the failure of the CEO is because I have a good superintendent in position who is aligned with my values and is carrying it out. We have a strong Parks District General Superintendent who carries out my vision, because these entities have the responsibility within their own budgets to carry out my vision, right?
Well, you don't have a CEO now.
Hold it, but I just want to make a
Martinez
point, though. We have an aviation person that's coming in, right? That's going to carry out our vision. We're talking about billions of dollars of contributions to not just the city of Chicago, but the entire region. And so we are going to have someone in position who will be able to work with my administration and the state of Illinois and the Board of Education to work through options to help us move forward in our vision for Chicago. There's no secret here that there's not a more pro-education mayor anywhere out in the country than me. There's just not one. We've put forth $1.2 billion of investments just this last year to shore up the Chicago Public Schools, the largest TIF surplus in the history of Chicago. And we're going to continue to work with an incoming CEO and a Board of Education to work towards not only having a solvent district, but a vibrant school district.
Along the way, CTU President Stacey Davis Gates tried to have her members take over the jobs of teaching assistants for special ed students. That did not work out. They backed off. But in the process, you have this civil war that went on between SEIU and CTU and your administration. SEIU asked for your help at one point to get them to back off. You didn't get involved initially. And so now there's a rift. You're in danger of not having SEIU be in your corner for reelection. They gave you $5 million. They gave you manpower. How can you win without them?
Well, first of all, let me just say that the members who are part of SEIU Local 73, who are Park District workers and CPS workers, receive their best contracts ever, right? And so we've raised the raises for Local 73 in our parks as well as in our public schools. And I'm going to continue to show up for labor. And I did intervene. And the CTU did make an adjustment in their proposal.
Belatedly.
Well, they
got pretty ugly for a
secured.
while.
Well, look, it doesn't change the fact it did, but we were able to fix it. That's the point here. So
Well,
this
have
is
you
all I'm
fixed
simply
it
saying
to
is,
the point where they're
well,
going to be with
let's
you?
take one thing at a time, though, because I think the most important thing is it's not about Brandon's reelection. It's about making sure that workers in this city are valued. And I don't want to belabor this point, but I try to walk in humility. I really do. That I don't walk around taking any of the opposition or concerns that people have personally. My main responsibility was to ensure that we have a school district, a park district that's invested in, and that the workers are valued. And I did that. If you look at what the Local 73 was asking for, they were in negotiations prior to me becoming mayor. This was another failure of the CEO. He couldn't land it. So I came in and intervened. Same thing with the parks. We landed it. And, as far as reelection is concerned, we'll address that as we get closer to that moment. And the most pro-worker mayor in the country, whether it's the paid time off with 1.2 million workers who have 10 paid days off, abolishing the sub-minimum wage so that Black and brown women who are part of the hospitality and the restaurant vibrancy that we have in the city of Chicago, that those workers are supported and creating more stability there, and making sure that our teachers' assistants, whether they are SECA workers or CTU members, whether they're CTU or 73, these members received raises that allow for them to live in what my ultimate vision and goal is for the city of Chicago moving forward, is to be the safest, most affordable big city in America. And that's what we're building.
Another point of contention has been your relationship with the city council. I'll talk about the property tax increase the last budget season. You proposed a $300 million property tax increase. You cut it in half. The council ended up voting 50-0 to declare their opposition to a tax increase. And that forced you to cobble together your budget, based on kind of nickel and dime increases, fines and fees, and cuts, asking departments to get that 3% cut. On the day the budget stalemate ended, council members, even your own allies, said that communication was not up to par. It was strained, and that had to change. I'm just wondering, how do you reflect on that time? Why was the relationship so strained to that degree, and what have you done since to improve it?
Well, look, it has been a challenge, right? There's no secret there. The city of Chicago is different, and I've said this from the very beginning. The city government that we inherited will not be the city government that we pass on to the next generation. And I'm good with that, right? This is not our forefathers, foremothers government anymore, right? It's a far more inclusive, engaged government, which is something that the people of Chicago wanted. And I'm glad that I'm the mayor who is a part of that transformation. We don't have rubber stamp anymore. You have allies who are independent and that are not being dictated in terms of how they cast their votes, right? That was the type of mean-spirited governance that I believe have led to some of the most draconian and awful financial decisions in the history of Chicago, right? So that government of rubber stamp ruined the finances of the city. What I can say is that we are engaged more on a more regular, frequent level. We are engaging earlier. Those are the lessons that I learned. We are putting together a working group. I'm the first mayor in the history of Chicago to call for a working group to address the financial challenges that we are experiencing, that I inherited. Look, it's ultimately going to take all of us to work towards improving the quality of life for the people in the city of Chicago. And not only am I amenable to that, I recognize that there is an opportunity to build stronger consensus. And just keep in mind, we had a very aggressive first year, right? We moved, at a pace that I think some people felt that it was moving, too fast. But again, abolishing the sub-minimum wage and, the pay time off ordinance and, working to shore up our largest investment in the history of Chicago for affordable homes and economic development with our $1.25 billion investment. We've done some incredible work together, right? And I believe that the more frequent we engage with city council, engaging with more city council members, right? All of whom have an opportunity to engage with me. If you talk to some city council members, and I would implore you to do this, many of them will tell you that I'm the first mayor to sit with them. And not just sit with them, but sit with them multiple times. Some administrations never even engage with
Rahm
most
Emanuel
officers.
used to meet with all the aldermen frequently.
That's not true. Ask them yourself. They've told me. And so whether it was 5 minutes or a phone call, I'm talking about actually sitting down with city council members. They will tell you that over the course of their time with other administrations, maybe once, maybe twice, all I'm saying is, for me moving forward, there's an opportunity for us to engage earlier and more frequently, and that's exactly what I'm doing, while also bringing labor to the table, business leaders to the table, community-based organizations to the table, faith leaders to the table, corporate leaders to the table, where all of us have a collective responsibility to transform this city. This is not about one mayor. This is not about one person. This is about all of us. And so the lesson that I have learned, that I have to spend more time with more people on a regular basis, and I have to be far more intentional about effectively communicating in a way with the public so they know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to ultimately do it together.
So I hear you saying, this is democracy in action, and you don't want to make unilateral decisions behind closed doors, as you say, previous mayors have done. But, at the end of the day, you spent this political capital trying to go back on a campaign promise to hold the line on property taxes, and you had nothing to show for it because the council rejected that. So do you regret not building consensus around a property tax increase a little bit behind closed doors before going out to that in the public without the support of the council?
So traditionally, when a budget is proposed, that we have conversations about what's in the budget and what's not in the budget. This is the first time that I believe in the history of Chicago where the budget was separated, where the revenue was separated from our expenses, essentially, right? What I know I have to do moving forward is having more regular, frequent conversations with our alders. And I'm committed to that. It's a lesson learned. We're already showing up and having conversations. Look, we have to look forward, right? If we spend all of our time having a conversation about what I should have, what I could have done, then you would sound like a Cubs or a Sox fan, right? This is
Maybe
about maybe more of a Sox fan, right? But the point being is that, look, I get this as a retrospective moment, but again, if you look at what's happening in the city of Chicago right now, where else in our country are we building affordable homes downtown, right? Where else in our country have we seen the expediency of how we are drawing more young people into our spaces 29,000 young people will have summer jobs. We did that together. We built a one system initiative to respond to homelessness in this city. And now we have not only more beds, we are working to reconfigure our beds so that we create more beds for single adults. When people call for shelters in this city, for the first time in a decade, there's not a waiting list for a family. We've reopened mental health clinics in this city. I'm the first mayor since Mayor Harold Washington to invest in mental and public health. And we had the safest April since 1962. This is about moving forward. My hope is that, again, we build the most affordable, the safest, most affordable big city in America. And we're moving in that direction.
The playbook for Chicago mayors for decades has always been you raise taxes in the first budget after the election, and then you give the voters 3 years to forget. You did not do that. And as a result, and the property tax rebellion that we had, you now face two budgets closest to the election that will have to have property tax increases or some other big tax package. Did you make a mistake in doing that and not raising taxes immediately?
Well, look, it's my job to present a budget. It's the responsibility of the city council to vote on that budget, right? That's the fundamental function of government. And what we have in the city of Chicago, we have the remnants of real bad financial planning. And that's why this working group is so critical.
I'm talking about your mistake.
Again, I'm not going to go
Did you make a mistake in not
Look,
raising taxes
I hear
after
your,
the election?
I hear your question. I do. I'm not going to continue to talk about what didn't happen 2 years ago, right? We're talking about what it means to move forward here. And here's what I've already admitted to, that I have to do a better job at effectively communicating to the people of Chicago what we're doing and why we're doing it, right? And we're going to do that. We're going to do a better job of that, and we're doing that already.
Do you wish you had tackled it sooner? And that way you'd have a bigger base now to build on, tax base.
I mean, it sounds like you're offering up some political analysis, and I'm saying that I am governing right now. This is not about politics. This is about me governing. And this is why pulling together business leaders, because people want to help. That's a good thing. People have been shut out from government. I'm bringing more people in, business leaders, philanthropic leaders, the faith-based community, labor, all of us coming together to solve the failures of the past, right? Because moving forward, here's what we do know. As I push to make sure that we have the safest, most affordable city in America, where if you look at New York, you look at Los Angeles, the prices of homes, $1 million, $800,000, $900,000. The city of Chicago, you can still purchase a home for around $350,000, $375,000, but it's a 7% increase. And so I'm going to work as we have built more affordable homes, as we've invested more in young people, as we make sure that we've invested in our workforce, that we haven't had to cut services and lay people off and offer furloughs. You know, these are budgetary challenges that people are having around the globe, particularly at a time in which you have a tyrant in the White House who has put forth these tariffs that has caused a great deal of consternation and anxiety. And it's why many people who are hesitant and reticent to make large-scale investments. Those are all the challenges that we are facing collectively. And I'm going to work with the state. We're going to work with, again, this collection of people that I put forth in this working group to be able to build an apparatus to ensure that we have the safest, most affordable big city in America.
Byron Sichko Lopez has likened the aldermanic opposition to you to council wars. Do you see a parallel there or not?
You know what? I mean, look, the history will write itself, right? I haven't given that too much thought about, what happened in the 80s and what's happening today. What I can say is this, though. If you look at all of the things that the people of Chicago wanted to see, they wanted to see me build more affordable homes. They wanted to see me invest in public education. They wanted me to invest in young people. They wanted me to hire more detectives and to drive a violent crime down in the city of Chicago. We're doing all of that. And yes, we have opposition, but it's very clear, though, with this pack of millionaires that whatever their opposition is, It can't be around community safety, right? Because we're safer. It can't be around building more affordable homes because we're doing that. It certainly can't be about how
What
we
is it
invest in young
about
people.
then?
Well, I mean, I think that's the question that you have to ask
What do
them.
you think?
Well, if they're brave enough to come out and actually say what it is, they should do that.
What do you think it is?
Well, I mean, it's clear to me that, again, the same individuals who promoted redlining in this city, the same individuals that protected the interests of the ultra-rich, the same individuals that wanted to see our schools privatized and public housing dismantled, these are the individuals, who mortgaged the future of our city off the backs of working people today. Those are the individuals that created the climate in which we're working to transform. If there was one other thing that I would say, too, is that I think the pace and the scale in which we are working to transform this city, I believe it intimidates them. They shouldn't be, right? Because there's room for everyone. $11 billion of new investments in our city.
Intimidated? Why?
Well, I mean,
Because they're going to have to pay for it?
well, because they're going to have
You
to
want to tax the rich.
because
You
they're going to
talked
have to
about
put
that.
more skin in the game. That's not just me. The governor of Illinois believes in a progressive income tax, and he's a billionaire. You have people all over the country that are challenging governments to challenge the people who are the ultra rich in this nation to put more skin in the game. It's not unreasonable. If you look at the wealth gap that continues to grow between everyday working people in this city and the ultra rich, it continues to expand. Just last year, we saw the report where the average wealth for a white family in the city of Chicago is over $200,000, and the cumulative wealth for black families is zero. Zero. That means there are black families who are waking up in this city every single day, and they're barely breaking even. It reminds me of the song on The Wiz, "You can't win, and you can't even get out the game." And we're working to transform that. And if there was one thing that, in retrospect, that I just, it's frustrating. And I know it's frustrating for the people of Chicago. The pace in which the city of Chicago needs transformation, it's still moving too slow. And that's why I'm going to effectively spend more time talking to people directly about the what and why. And the what is, we're going to build the most safest, affordable big city in America.
Talking about pace and moving too slowly, you were highly critical of the CTA during your campaign, and yet you stuck with Dorville Carter for nearly 2 years. Why did you do that, and is John Roberson going over to the CTA?
Well, let's just say public transportation is a top priority of mine, right? Because, it's in order for people to have real absolute safety in this city, the public accommodations have to show up for everyone. And what we've seen over the last year, 300 million riders between buses and trains. So we are moving in the right direction. I've said this repeatedly. We have to hire more people, and we've done that. And that has allowed us to have more frequency, better streets for buses, to create more express buses. And then, of course, the extension of the Red Line, which was nearly a $2 billion investment, and particularly for those families on the far south side of Chicago that, they'll have greater access to the city. And we accomplished those things, right? And, again, I know people want us to move faster. I do. And that is frustrating for me as well, because in running government, it's another lesson that I've learned, that there are far more complexities that exist within government that you have to work through. I have not firmly made a decision yet on who is going to ultimately lead the transportation system in Chicago, but I can tell you this: the person that we do get has to be someone that's committed to hiring more people so that we can move our transportation with more expediency. They have to be committed to being a collaborative person, working with security and policing, as well as our housing advocates, as we know that our transportation system has been a place where those who are unhoused or those who are experiencing mental health crises find their way on the system. And we have to have someone who is innovative and effective at bringing all of the forces together to respond to
Have you
that
been
challenge.
lobbying for Roberson, and is there resistance to him?
Well, again, this is not about an individual or an individual's name. This is about the character that this person has to reflect. And look, I've had conversations with people all over the country. We've put forth a national search, and we've talked to a number of individuals that, some have some strong skills that I appreciate, and others didn't have all of the skills that I would, want to see in our leader, the CTA. But again, I want to be absolutely clear. The person that I select will reflect the values of my administration. Someone who's going to show up for workers, someone's going to make sure that we have a reliable, safe, effective transportation system. And I feel confident, just like I've made appointments before, whether it's the incoming aviation, whether it's my superintendent, the eventual person that I will appoint for our public schools, every single person that I've had the opportunity to communicate and appoint to lead our sister agencies and our departments, we have seen tremendous results.
You've recently been making a lot more appearances on Black radio and Black churches. You have your Faith in Government initiative. Does your path to reelection run through the Black community?
Well, look, the coalition that I built to become mayor of the city of Chicago, it entailed a multicultural movement and a coalition of Black, brown, white, Asian, young, old. I mean, seen it across the city. And that's the coalition that it's going to take for us to be able to govern effectively. Look, I'll be very direct and honest. I honestly do not spend a whole lot of time thinking about reelection. I just don't. I spend most of my days speaking about how we can build, again, the safest, most affordable big city in America. And we're moving in that right direction. Now, I will say this: there's no secret of the historic disinvestment on the south and west sides of Chicago, right? When we experienced the flooding back in 2023, it's very clear that the water lines were an afterthought when they were built on the west side of Chicago. So we got $100 million of immediate relief. I directed my street and sanitation to go into the basements of families, which has never happened for West Siders and South Siders in particular, to actually help them clean it out. We secured another $400 million that's going to help transform the infrastructure on the west side of Chicago, and we put forth another $90 million to go directly to those homeowners. So when we think about those investments that will be transformational, no one in Chicago should argue that having a prioritization for the west and south side of Chicago, that if you've been around Chicago for any period of time, it just makes sense to do that. And that's why with our youth employment and the fact that Roseland has a mental health clinic that's free, the fact that we have, again, 45% increase in youth employment, most of those young people from the west and south sides of Chicago. When you look at when I brought our police department together around what is it going to take to, get guns off the streets, 12,000 guns off the street last year. When I brought folks together to figure out how do we drive down shootings in the 35 most violent beats in the city of Chicago, I brought folks together to analyze that, to understand the strategy around that with these robberies, wanted to understand these impediments and the strategy around that, brought folks together. And now we have a 37% decrease in robberies. And if you look at the 35 most violent beats in Chicago, we're talking about places where schools have been closed and unemployment is high. It's why we're showing up with the full force of government in these particular communities.
But there is still lingering resentment in the Black community for the migrant crisis and the Park District facilities that you closed and took away from these communities to house migrants at the height of the crisis. How are you going to fix those wounds?
Yeah, I understand that frustration. I was frustrated, right? The Biden administration, the federal government, left cities to fend for themselves. That's why I passed the bus ordinance. First city in America to do that, to actually not only slow the buses down, but eventually stop them from coming to the city of Chicago. We didn't get a bus after January 25th of 2023.
Well, how do you fix that, though?
But this is how we fix it, right? We had to fix the problem first. Remember, there were 4,000 migrants sleeping on floors in police districts. We had to fix it, and we did, right? And with no help from the federal government, none whatsoever. And, the governor of Texas attacked the city of Chicago. Everyone knows he did it intentionally to create the type of fissure that you're
I
talking
know,
about.
but the blame game won't work with these.
This is not about the blame, though, Fran. This is about telling the people the truth. Remember I said earlier, one of the regrets that I did have is not effectively communicating to people the why and the what. So I have to get people the what first, and then we'll get to the why in a second, and then how we move forward, because we already are moving forward, by the way. But the reality is that our city was under attack. Governor Abbott spent over $200 million of taxpayer dollars to send buses only to cities like Chicago. That was intentional. And so we had to stop the buses from running us over. And we did that. There were 4,000 people on the streets of Chicago. Now think about it this way, Fran. What if I did not fix that problem? There would have been a different narrative about my ability to fix and respond to a crisis. So not only did we respond to the crisis, stop the buses from coming, and this was well before Donald Trump was elected. There was not a single bus that came in the city of Chicago after June of 2024 before the DNC. So what I'm saying is that the crisis we were able to fix, and then here's how we move forward. We built a one system initiative out of a crisis that I inherited. And now we have a one system initiative where we're working with the state of Illinois to respond to those who are unhoused. And so now for the first time, especially for the first time, we have no families on the waiting list. When 70% of Chicagoans who are without homes are Black, that's something that we do have to address, and we are addressing that through our One System initiative. Here's how else we heal those wounds. We make sure that we're building more affordable homes, which we're doing. We make sure that we're responding to our young people, which we're doing. We make sure that we drive violence down in the city of Chicago, which we're doing. These are all the things that Black families have wanted in the city for a generation. And now we're finally showing up, building more affordable homes, investing in our public schools, investing in our young people, investing in their mental health. I have to do a better job, and I will, effectively communicating that message to families so that they can heal. Because the way you heal people is to actually show up with something that they can be healed with.
Mayor, on crime, it's down. Homicides are down. Robberies are at a historic low. Do you think that you're getting the credit you deserve for the drop? And if not, why not? Is it because people still don't feel safe? Can you talk about that?
Well, let's talk about the back end of what you just said. Even with crime going down, if people don't feel safe, if they don't feel comfortable being able to walk their dogs, to go to a park, to walk to a restaurant, or walk your child to school, if people don't feel safe, then that means we still have a lot of work to do. And we could do millions of things, but if people don't feel the benefit of that work, then it's void. And part of my effort, moving forward, is to better communicate with people what we're doing. Again, as much as I want to build a city, which I know we can, a big city that is safe and affordable, I have to do a better job at communicating with people. And look, one shooting, one homicide is still one too many. And, the way in which we've approached this is that I have brought people together and had strategic conversations about what are the impediments to, having more detectives. Well, we were able to work through those impediments, and we do have the benefit of having hired 200 more detectives. And as a result, our clearance rates are higher than they've been in a decade. Right?
You were able to quickly sweeten and extend the police contract, but the firefighters are still waiting 4 years. Why?
Look, I can't speak to the 2 years prior to me arriving. What I can say is that I've brought people to the table recently to really work through those challenges at the table and those differences. Some of the things that we are talking about is the fact that not just in Chicago, but around the country, there's a shift in terms of first responders. There's a greater need for ambulatory care than it is for the traditional fire trucks.
They want 20 more ambulances. Can we do it?
We're working through it. Look, at the end of the day,
do we need 20 more?
I will say this: there's a reason why I believe that there are still some challenges at the table, because it's not about what we know we need. It's also about the pathway in which we can afford the things that we need. And you know, this moment, you know, really has pushed me to push the people at the table that I've entrusted. Um, and it's much like what happened with Local 73 or CTU Local 1 for me to dig in a little bit more. Look, we've settled multiple contracts since I've been in office. This is one that I know that we have to work a little harder to make sure that we get it done.
Is
And
it
we will.
time to close firehouses to reduce the minimum staffing requirement that requires 5 employees on a piece of apparatus, with the exception of daily variances? Are there things that need to be done to right size this department for today and the emergency medical calls that dominate?
I think there's a need for us to figure out how to have the type of innovative approach towards what the demands will be for first responders moving forward. And that, here's the thing, Fran, the the infrastructure within our city has been around for so long. It's not as nimble and flexible as it needs to be. And I believe one of the challenges that we're having with all of our contracts is that the type of systems that we need moving forward, they just don't exist. And I can tell you this, I am absolutely committed to moving that table with more expediency. And I'm having conversations with folks on a more regular basis to do that.
Are you trying to close houses and reduce that
You
staffing
know,
requirement?
friend, you're impressive, but I'm not going to negotiate a contract publicly. But what I can say is that we have worked tirelessly to ensure that the very best of what our first responders deserve, that we get there. And it's I, look, just last week was one of those just tougher weeks for Chicago as we laid to rest Captain David Meyer, and our hearts still mourn for our first responders that put their lives on the line and have paid the ultimate sacrifice. And as a city, I know that we embrace our first responders, and I'm going to continue to work with all stakeholders to ensure that our first responders, and particularly our firefighters, get the quality support and the type of contract that allows for us to have the type of innovation for services that the people of Chicago want.
Mayor, on Thursday on your Ask the Mayor show with WBEZ, you called on voters to lobby Springfield for progressive revenue. And I just want to know, what do you say to people who think, well, I lobbied to get you elected, or I went out and voted for you so that you could do that?
That's not how transformation works. You heard the governor recently say, calling people to take it to the streets. Look, transformation doesn't happen with just one elected official. Now, look, here's the good news. You don't have to lobby me, right? Not in that regard, right? Because I'm committed to it. But people should not lose their voices after they vote. In fact, that is the failure of our democracy. People do that. It's think about it this way. Think about the people who voted for me that are still demanding me to do things more and do it faster. So why am I the only one who is subject to that, but an entire body of government should not have that same type of political engagement? Like, I think it would be irresponsible if people not activate their voices. And it's the one thing that I do know that all of us in the state of Illinois agree to. You don't just activate your voices when you lose an election. You don't do that. You have to remain engaged. When I think about the civil rights movement in particular, where Black voters played a critical role in the changing of guard in this country. Did the civil rights leaders just go home and just sit and wait for LBJ? They didn't do that. Look, as a social studies teacher, someone who loves history, those are the lessons that we've learned already. And what I believe this moment calls for is for every single person who believes in my administration, who believe that we can build the safest, most affordable big city in America, that is still going to take a collective push. And just know that you don't need to necessarily push me to do what's right. What we do need to do is to push for conditions so that we can do what is right.
Before we let you go, Mayor, and
I
you've
was
been
having so
generous.
much fun.
You've been generous with your time.
Yeah.
2 questions. Who do you expect your opponents to be?
Oh my goodness, Fran. Look, we're transforming this city, period, point blank. You have a middle school teacher, a husband, a father, born and raised in a working class family, no deep political ties to any established machinery in this city. And within 2 years, let's just pause for a second. In 2 years, we have literally seen violent crime go down in this city. It was the top priority that I made, and it was the number one issue when I ran for this seat. And we're showing up with those results in a real way. Now, look, I'm going to do a better job at effectively communicating that. I'm not thinking about.
Who do you
Clearly,
think
we
they'll
have.
be? Yeah,
well,
Alexei Janulius is piling up millions. He's talking to people about the issues. He's ready to gear up. Do you expect him to be your opponent?
Well, we clearly know that we have a $10 million PAC that is staring the working people in this city right in the face with all of their ammunition. We already know who our opponents are. We already know. We know.
Okay, but I'm talking about the candidate that they're going to choose.
I don't know who they're going to choose, but here's the thing.
Susanna Mendoza, Alexei Janulius, Rahm Emanuel, who? Hello? Sir?
You had another question?
You're not going to, you don't.
I told you who our opponents are. I've already told you. Our opponents are
who's their vehicle?
So it's very clear, though, that it's not about public safety, right? So whoever their vehicle is, it's not about public safety. It's not about building more affordable homes. It's not about building mental health clinics, right? It's not about looking out for our young people. It's not about, how we invest in education and workers. So I think the question that I would ask, what is it about? What's the opposition to the most diverse administration? What's the opposition to the safest April since 1962? What's the opposition to 29,000 young people on the west and south sides of the city of Chicago getting jobs? What's the opposition to us building more affordable homes? What's the opposition? My answer to that is the opposition is that they don't want to have to be held accountable. And working people deserve a leader who understands the everyday experience of working people. That's what I get up thinking about every single day. I don't think about the individuals who want to get back in this seat to continue to ruin the city of Chicago. What I will say is this. Here's what I will do better in these next 2 years as we build the safest, most affordable big city in America, is that I've learned my lesson in that as hard as the work is to actually get it done and the effort that I put in doing it, I have to expend that amount of effort to communicate to people why and what. And we're going to continue to show up at our senior homes, our days in the ward. So be on the lookout for me. And if there are individuals who want to hold these type of conversations, I'm willing to do that. But our lakeside chats, we're going to continue to engage the people of Chicago of how we build, again, the safest, most affordable big city in America.
And the final question is there any chance, with the polling as low as some of the polls seem to be, that you would decide not to run for reelection?
I don't give much attention to polling. Fran, you were there at the very beginning. I think I was polling when I first announced my candidacy.
Right.
The legitimate poll, not a poll that's been comprised by losers.
3%.
I say 2.2. It's like my father. Every time he talks about South Mississippi, he has less and less money in his pockets.
I rounded it up.
All right, thank you. And what I think about every single day is making life better for the everyday person in the city. I had a conversation with a young lady in Alderman Hopkins' ward, and she talked about she was in the city, left, and she came back. And I asked her why. And I won't say her name, but if she's listening, she knows what I'm talking about. And she said, look, I want to be a part of something special, legacy. And I believe that Chicago can afford that to me. I want to raise my family in Chicago. That's what I think about every day. The young woman in River North, the family that I spoke to in Streeterville, to be able to just be able to effectively be able to live in a community that includes downtown or the far south side or the west side, that what Streeterville wants is what Austin wants, what Roseland wants, it's what Old Town wants. And we have worked hard to build a city that is safe and affordable. Our best days are still in front of us. Billions of dollars of new investments, transforming this city block by block. And as violence continues to go down and investments continue to go up, I'm confident that as I do a better job at effectively creating space for people to understand the what and why, and that the pharisaical nature of my opposition, that we don't allow their yeast to spread and rise, just like the Bible lesson from my Bible study from last week. If we can do that effectively, I feel good about my ability to continue to lead this city moving forward.
Mayor Brandon Johnson, you're shrinking. Thank you for joining us. Happy anniversary, and good luck the next 2 years, sir. And Mariah, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
We'll see you next week.